With Evripidis Tsakiridis, known as Evris. It's March 17th, 1989, and we're in Venice, California. And we're going to be talking about some of his recollections, experiences in Greece during the dictatorship, and also we're going to be talking about Greek music, specifically rebetika. Okay, well, when were you living in Greece? During which years? Were you there during the entire dictatorship, or did you?
No, I was there for the first year, 67 to 68, and then 68 I left and came to the States for the first time.
Okay, and were you also there before 67?
Yes. So I lived there through the period of the instability of the Papandreou government. That's George Papandreou, the father of Andreas. And it was then that the government had a lot of problems with the palace, and pretty much in my view of things, this is one good explanation of what was happening, is that the Papandreou government tried to do a few mild social reforms that upset the palace and the American embassy.
And when you say palace, you're talking about the
king.
Monarchy.
Yeah. So there is another explanation of why we were led into the dictatorship. Not that the Papandreou government was being so radical, but that the American government wanted to create a situation in which the Cyprus issue would be rekindled and the world would look favorably to Turkey, and therefore Turkey would be able to invade the island, as it did happen later.
And what would the United States have to gain from that?
The United States have been increasingly interested in Turkey as opposed to Greece, because Turkey is very close to the Soviet Union. And especially now with the problems with Iran, of course, Turkey is also very close to Iran and the Soviet Union. So it's a very good place from which to know what's happening. Much better so than Greece. Certain things now can be done through satellite, of course, certain observations, but evidently it is still important to have some geographical access to right next to two of your biggest enemies.
And so by creating a situation where Turkey could regain or take over part of Cyprus, that would make Turkey more responsive to our interests.
Exactly.
Sort of making
That is the other explanation. And the way to do that, you would have to have a very easy to manipulate government in Athens.
And militaristic then also?
Yeah. And there is another explanation about the dictatorship that Paul Krasner is now promoting. I haven't read his evidence to that, and that's that the whole idea that Paul Krasner is putting out is that Greece was used by the CIA as a testing ground for dictatorships in developing countries, and that later there was a lot of information as to what works, what doesn't work, something like a guinea pig situation. So there are these three ideas about the dictatorship. Now, I, of course, did not know exactly at the time what was going on and why we were getting a dictatorship. But there was a very strong feeling in the country that somehow the Americans were behind it. Now, it has been proven that the NATO emergency plan was used when the dictators took over.
And what is this?
It's an emergency plan of what to do in case of emergency, and that's what was used. Do this, do that. First close the airports, then do this, then do that.
So this is what the generals did.
The generals used the NATO plan, but that does not mean that it was done under the blessings of the CIA necessarily. So let me not take a position and say that yes, I definitely agree with one of the explanations. Okay, but all the explanations that we have around, I have to do with American involvement. So much for that. Now, for the common people, of course, most people did believe that there was some American involvement, because Greece was going through a very anti-American phase at the first time. Then,
what was that from?
The Papandreou years. Well, you see, before that, there was the Marshall Plan after the Second World War that helped Greece economically. And of course, the communists were defeated after the Civil War, the short Civil War that followed the Second World War. And therefore, in the early 50s, when I was growing up, as a child, the country was extremely right-wing. The communist then was like now in the States is somebody who takes crack. It was like really margins, really evil, really dark. You know. There are always groups of people that are look very dark, you know, to various status quo points of view. And at that point, it was the communists. Of course, later that changed. When George Papandreou took over, it was still, you know, it was a centrist government. It was in no way a socialist government, but still, for the first time, anti-Americanism became semi-fashionable.
And was this in the early 60s that he took over?
Yes. And the problems began 66, 67.
Where were you at the time of the coup itself? Do you have?
I was up north. I was in Thessaloniki, and I was a student in high school. I remember that a girlfriend and I shared a small hall someplace that we called our secret apartment. And friends used to come over. It was a very small little place. We had written all kinds of things on the wall, like the pigs came on the 21st of April 1967, all kinds of things. So our wall was filled with graffiti against them. It was a good place to go and sort of, you know, make sure that, you know, nobody was taken away yet, or... I mean, I was not involved in the Communist Party or anything. Not that I was not friendly to communism. I was very much, but there's a big difference between that and actually joining a party when you know that some uncle in the family lost his life a few years back because of it. I was not, and I am not in general, the heroic person in the sense of politics. Now, in other respects, so heroism is a very strange thing, but there are some people who are very heroic in politics. They want to anger their parents and everything by joining the most radical organization. But, you know, in their lifestyle, beyond that, there's not much that's radical. So I was sort of the existential type then and now. And so were my friends. You know, we were not big militaristic Boy Scout types. Though we sort of, you know, admired the ones who had the guts to be, okay? We did not, you know, hold anything against the more militant Maoist friends, for example. In fact, there was a Maoist friend who used to come to that place, and we hid him for a while, 2 or 3 days, because the police was after him. They wanted to send him to one of the islands. There were some islands where they went for, like little Siberias of the Aegean. And
was this a sort of a holdover from the period after the Civil War, where these islands were used?
Yes. Yaros in particular. And we hid him because we didn't want him to go into that, and evidently somebody in the neighborhood saw some suspicious activity. Because you see, there were some Greeks, a minority, but still there were some Greeks who were very friendly to the dictators. They were still dreaming of the days of dictator Metaxas, who did do some good things, by the way. That was in the 30s. I wouldn't like to live under Metaxas. I was not born yet. I wouldn't like to live under Metaxas, where Rebetica, for example, were forbidden, all kinds of things. But still, I must say, in all honesty, that the 8-hour day and a few other things like pensions and things that are heroic. Of course, Greece was a developing country, and Metaxas would have to do something, no matter who he was. At any rate, to go back to his successor Papadopoulos, somebody in the neighborhood, evidently an admirer of the dictatorship, called up and said, "There's some weirdos going in that place." None of us were weird with long hair or anything like that, okay? But sometimes it's very easy to tell who is different.
Was this an apartment that you and some friends shared the cost of, or you and this girlfriend?
Yeah, it was an old house, and it was the ground floor of the old house. Just to understand where it is, well, it's in Thessaloniki, and it's very close to the Arch, if you know Thessaloniki. Anyway, so the cops came. We were just sitting around innocently, my friend Sophia and myself and a few other people. High school kids, all of us. And probably we were bitching about the situation. It was very, very unthinkable that would happen to Greece, but it was happening. We were very afraid. All of us had left-wing sympathies. Some friends who were very involved in parties. And of course there was no freedom of speech. It was terrible. We had no idea of what it would lead to, but all we were doing at the moment was just hiding that person. And that person was not there at the moment when they came in. But the way they came in was, of course, very abrupt, and they threw us on the walls with our hands behind us. They searched around, and while they were searching, I did the miraculous act. There was one extremely offensive anti-dictatorship sign, fortunately written in pencil on the wall behind me. And while they were just looking around, God bless my little fingers, I erased the damn thing. And by the time they took me to the other side of the room and they looked, they just saw a little smudge. They couldn't read anything. So that might be the reason. I mean, I was so lucky that they put me just in front of the most dangerous.
Do you remember what it said?
Oh yeah, it was a quotation from Cavafy about the barbarians, and then says the barbarians finally did come, and then it gave the date of the beginning of the dictatorship. Just calling them barbarians was enough to go to Yaros for a couple of years. We are talking, heavy duty.
And did you have the sense, even in the streets, walking, that the police had a certain oppressive presence?
Oh, yeah.
Were you always sort of careful of what you were saying in public?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And that was a very abrupt change from *66. I mean, it was
Yes,
sort of over.
yes. Oh, absolutely. Because now it was the army. Everybody would have to go to martial court, and that means that there's no witness, there's nothing. They shouldn't even take you to martial court. They could just send you to some kind of an exile situation or to jail and get tortured. With the types of tortures that were going on, everybody already knew, with electrodes and people's testicles.
And how did people know this?
Well, it was leaking constantly. People were coming out. People were being tortured, and then they would return, and the rumors would go around. So they took us to the Central Police, and in a very insulting manner, talked to us and kicked us around. They had, in an effort to make me speak and reveal where our friend was, which I had no idea where our friend was that day.
This Maoist friend?
Yeah, this Maoist friend.
This is who they were looking for?
Yeah. Where is he? I don't know where he is. I didn't even know where his home address was. I mean, I had met him in cafes, but I didn't know where his parents lived. I knew the general area, like he lives in Santa Monica, but no address. And thinking that I did know and I was hiding it, they brought Sophia and started kicking her breasts in front of me. They put her on the floor and started kicking her breasts, thinking that I was going to talk. I continued to say that I can't say anything, and then I really started fearing that they had big plans for us. Because those very, very hard days, plans meaning that my education would be discontinued, I would be sent to one of these exile places. I was almost finishing high school then, and I would never be able to get into the university. Because if you had anything politically questionable about you, that was the end of your education, period. So, the beautiful thing happened. One of the girls that was in our group was the daughter of the man who owned the building where the police headquarters was.
In the very group that was arrested?
In the very group that was arrested. And at some point, she spoke up and she said, "Do you know who my father is?" And that's how we got released. Then they were all smiles. "Oh, you're our kind of kids. Vikamas παιδιά." And they were apologetic. The famous father came and he gave us some kind of a pedagogical lecture, and that was it. And then that was questionable enough, that what happened, that when I got questionable behavior, that when I got a scholarship to come to the United States a few months later to go to the university in the States, I had problems because the American embassy was not sure I should get a student visa.
So it was clear that the American embassy was party to the information of the police.
Right, absolutely. I'm sure that, the American embassy always asks the Greek police about giving visas, especially in those days. And fortunately, my mother's boyfriend was a military man, and he just vowed that everybody is going to be just all right. It was some craziness of youth, blah, 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 blah. And that's how I came to this country. And I desperately needed to come to America or to any other country where I could use my English language skills to further my studies, because I could not really go to the Greek university after what happened. Just that little incident, that I might have known where the guy was and refused to tell them. Just on that basis, it would be impossible to enter university those days. Very, very hard control over everything. We used to hear a lot of military marches every day on the radio. I mean, the atmosphere was like we were preparing to go to war with somebody. All the labor freedoms were suspended, of course, and so was freedom of speech. These are my impressions. In the end, I realized that with my mother's boyfriend's help, I was going to go to America, and I was very elated, and I made a very big mistake. Right at the very end of my high school days, we had tests to pass, and they gave us a topic for composition. And the topic for composition had something to do, believe it or not, with freedom. I don't remember the exact title. And very obliquely, I spoke my mind. That was a big mistake. Because I was not aware, I should have been, but you know, this is the idiocy of being 18. I should have been aware that my composition would have been read not simply by my teachers, but also by the man from the government. Just check to see if there's any weirdos, and he thought that I should not pass in composition. I had always been the best student in composition throughout my years in high school. That's where I excelled. That and algebra. And we had big problems then. They wanted me to fail, and therefore I would not be able to leave the country and go to the American university that had given me the scholarship. And one of my teachers, Vaius Baglanis, God bless his heart, he died later of a car accident. He stood up and said, you know, if you are going to fail this composition, I'm going to create such a big fuss, etc., etc. He put his career on the line, and he's the man who saved me in that respect, so I was able to leave the country. So these are my early impressions. These are my impressions of the early days. Then I left, and then when I went back 4 years later, after doing my undergraduate work.
What year is this now?
72.
Hold on a second, I want to put these down now because I really don't like the light on your glasses.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I'm going to turn on this spotlight over here.
Okay.
Just take a second. Okay, can you lean forward on your haunches like you did one time before? You leaned forward like this at one point.
I did?
Yeah,
That much?
put your leg down and lean forward more. You leaned even more. Yeah, just make sure you're still in there. Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, that would be the worst leaning.
Yeah, you can do whatever. You're pretty. See, I like to have it as close as possible, but not so that if you do this,
You're out.
you're out of it. So, all right. So you left in '67 and you went to school.
I left in 68.
68.
They came in 67. Okay?
Right.
I left 68 and I came back 72, 4 years later. And when I came back, I was basically depoliticized because when I left for the United States, I was a Marxist. And when I came to the United States, I continued to be a Marxist, but at some point I became very pessimistic about Marxism, and therefore my existentialist side became stronger. And I did become some kind of a hippie, albeit intellectual hippie, but hippie nonetheless.
Can you just tell us what you mean by existential?
Existential? what really matters is what you do, what responsibility you take on an everyday basis. Some of that is going to be political, but that can't be the only thing that matters. That's the easiest way I can put it. To really take responsibility for what is your shit, and not say that it's somebody else's. Okay, things like that. Everyday relationships. Anyway. Yeah, that's why I keep. No. Let's keep the.
Do you have a message on there?
No, there's no message.
Oh, that's the cat doesn't.
So the cat doesn't destroy my messages. That's the function of the Webster's dictionary. So I did not. When I came back to Greece, it was the same thing basically, but I did not hook up with any particular organization. Again, on the one hand, because I was not such a fervent Marxist as I used to be, but also because in general I'm not a very heroic person in the political sense. And
you mean a risk taker?
A great risk taker. I mean, and by risk taker we mean your life. We are not talking about small risks. We are talking about very big risks. And you see what's wrong. I mean, you see that it is wrong. But again, you cannot be untrue to your true nature. My true nature is not to do a small political act that looks very good and probably has some meaning for the progress of history, and then spend your next 30 years in the worst possible conditions, getting tuberculosis and so forth in some cell or other. I know some people can do it and it's very great. I hope I can do other things well, because that's not where I excel. And I'm not going to sit around and feel ashamed about it. Oh, I could have been more active. No, I could not have been more active. I wish, in a way, I could, but then the reality is that I couldn't. But I did other things. I hit people again. This time I hit a very close relative of mine, and that's a risk right there. But it's not like as if it were me going out and spraying signs on the walls like I knew other people were doing. I didn't have the guts to do that.
Was there a sense, I don't mean to interrupt
yes.
you, but was there a sense among your friends that, whereas here, one who may be particularly athletic or particularly musical or a good surfer, where we have less of a political tension and the types of things that win admiration from friends are more mundane, was the feeling that those who took great risk, those were the people who were looked up to? Was that the general?
Absolutely. It was like small heroes. And there might have been a degree of vanity that some people did their heroism for. But there certainly must have been others who did not do it out of vanity, but because they were, really inspired. And it's great that they could do it. So,
I'm asking this next. This is another area where I am very interested in getting the perceptions of people who have lived through things like the Greek dictatorship. These people who tend to put their lives on the line, who become the martyrs. Since you've probably had friends that were of that nature, do you get the sense that people reach a point of frustration, or is there some point where they make a decision that they will risk even their lives for the goal that they're trying to achieve, whether it's bringing down the dictatorship or just painting a sign on the wall? Do people seem to undergo a conversion to this self-sacrificing approach of confrontation? Did you get that sense among people you knew that?
Yes, and very honestly, the couple of people that I knew that were into that were uninteresting people otherwise. It seems to me that, at least, perhaps I'm trying to rationalize why I have been more of a coward. My rationalization, which may be true or not,